This audio presentation of Hi Dad is brought to you by the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite, Southern Jurisdiction. Written by Herbert Ewing Duncan. Executive producers: Scottish Rite Grand Commander James D. Cole, 33rd degree. Grandmaster of DeMolay John Sellars, and DeMolay Grand Secretary Stephen E. Crane. Narrated and produced by Matt Bowers, 32nd degree. Consulting producer Dean Alban, 33rd degree. Hi Dad Book, copyright 1981. Audio recordings copyright 2023. All rights reserved. For information on how you can donate to support this audio serial, visit DeMolay.org. Chapter 5. When a Dream Enslaves a Man. The dream of Frank Land for a distinctive organization to help young men grow into manhood with purpose and distinction became a reality in the few short months from March to September of 1919. During this time, his dedication to the order he had created became so intense that one could not tell from speaking with him if his dreams of it were all truth, or this truth consisted of dreams. If, he reasoned, what we are forming is good and is received with enthusiasm by the boys of one high school, it must also be good for the young men of the 3 other high schools of the city, perhaps by those of similar age in other cities, perhaps, and the dream expanded by the young men of the world. So great was his growing dream that all his time and creative genius were given to its perfection. He talked with the men who were interested in the new boys' club. Constantly he called upon Frank Marshall, Judge Cochran, and Pat Osgood for advice, but most of all, with his deep spiritual nature, he began a lifelong practice of beginning each day in meditation and prayer, seeking the guidance and approval of his God. Sponsorship had to come first, and this was given by Adoniram Lodge of Perfection of the Scottish Rite bodies of Kansas City. Assisting in the full sponsorship, the first advisory council of a DeMolay chapter was appointed, consisting of John H. Glazier as chairman, Frank S. Land as dad, Perce A. Budd, Frank A. Marshall, Arthur S. Metzger, Fred O. Wood, Leon Thalman, W. P. Osgood, Raymond A. Havens, Frank I. Buckingham, Ellis R. Jones, and Alex MacDonald. Each man was or was to become a 33rd degree Scottish Rite Mason, and all were past or present officers in the Scottish Rite. Now with sponsorship there was much to be done. Of course, at the beginning of this period, the ritual had been written and had received the overwhelming approval of those who were permitted to read it. The first group of boys had been obligated at the first DeMolay altar, but the ritual had never been exemplified, nor had the precise manner of movement of the opening of a chapter been worked out. There were so many portions of the degree work that could only be completed through trial and experiment. The dream of Frank Land was that each part must be presented with the highest perfection, and he knew this could only come by endless rehearsal. In the beginning of any organization, there are countless details that must be carefully planned. There was the decision to be made about robes for the officers during the meetings, costumes to be designed for the dramatic second portion of the degrees of initiation, as well as petition forms and membership patents, the determination of dues and fees, and some insignia to serve as a symbol of DeMolay. One evening in June, Frank arrived home in a state of eager excitement. He had just thought of a solution to a problem that had been in the back of his mind for a long time. His wife welcomed him at the door of their apartment to be surprised at his greeting of, "Now, where is the picture I painted a long time ago of a heraldic shield? You know, the one I drew in art school? The one that nearly caused me to be expelled?" Nell thought for a while. "I believe I can find it, Frankie," she said, and after some delay brought it into the living room. Frank looked at it from every angle, placed it on a chair to view it from a distance, and exclaimed, "It is perfect. It is just what we need for our emblem. We must have an emblem, you know. I will redraw this one with minor changes and use it for the altar cloth, for the preceptor stands, for the design of a pin to be worn by each DeMolay, and for our stationery. Look at it. There are even 10 jewels surrounding the shield." He thought for a while. It seems to me that the jewels should personify something and have greater meaning than just serving as ornaments. What do you suggest?" Land seemed lost in his world of dream and finally answered, "I believe they should signify the first for our boys, Louis Lower and the other 8 who came with him on that first night that now seems so long ago." "But that is only 9, questioned Nell. "How about the 10th jewel?" Slowly, Frank turned to her, took her hand in his, and with deep emotion replied, "The 10th jewel will stand for me as the founder of the group. I will always be proud of becoming in this way a part of the symbolic organization of DeMolay." Slowly, he continued, "In the years to come, each of us will enter into the adventure beyond this life. Then the color of each jewel, in turn, can change from white to red. Years from now, there will be 10 rubies to give testimonial that in the beginning, there were 10 who shared a dream together." The drawing was completed and sent out for estimates and for a hurry-up time schedule for the first jewels. Pad Osgood was delighted with the design. "We need a Bible marker and a cover for each preceptor stand," then volunteered, "Let me take this home. My wife is an excellent seamstress. She will be happy to make these." So the markers were completed, used for many years, and 40 years later found a niche in the Museum of Early DeMolay History. They were made from an old velvet dress of royal purple with side edging and end tasseling of gold with the emblem on the Bible marker and virtues of the preceptor's stations embroidered by the skill of her hands and her dedication to a cause. Early in August, the first rehearsals were held. The ritual was not in book form, but each officer was given a mimeographed copy with his part underlined in red. Dad Land had spoken to them at the conclusion of the night when each had knelt and taken upon himself the obligation of a DeMolay. "This is a night to be long remembered. None of us here will ever forget it. It will always be engraved in our memories. You are no longer a club. You are now members of the Order of DeMolay. The copy of the ritual given to you must be held sacred and is not, under any circumstances, to be shown to any other than those present. I expect each officer to learn his part exactly as it is written, from memory. Each part is important, no matter how small it may seem to you. It all blends into the whole to give us true meaning. There will be a rehearsal next Saturday afternoon, and I expect each of you to be present. Frank Marshall will be with us to help give full interpretation to his writing. Several of the most proficient ritualists of the Masonic fraternity, as well as speech teachers from the public schools, will be there to give us a few pointers in diction, breath control, and voice projection. Remember, whatever we do must be the best we can do. See you on Saturday." This rehearsal that had at first appeared to be so simple suddenly became difficult and complex. Not a boy among them had ever sat in a lodge room, nor had ever witnessed an initiation given with the help of a ritual. Only a few knew the rudiments of parliamentary procedure. It was necessary to explain the use of a gavel, giving 1 rap to seat the chapter, 2 raps for the officers to stand, and 3 raps for each member of the chapter to stand. The entrance of the officers into the chapter room presented the first serious problem. The boys sauntered into the room in groups of 2 or 3, and after some hesitation each found his station. Land and Marshall were horrified. This was not the way they had planned at all. Land moved the altar to talk it over with the boys, to explain. "Fellows, I am glad you found your stations. That much is important. But you must have dignity to give dignity. You must have sincerity to give sincerity to others. You came into the room like the members of a mob. It is my fault because I did not fully explain what we are doing. We will have to experiment to find the ideal way. As a starter, let's try coming into the room in a double file. Circle the room, and then as each comes to his station, let him leave the line and stand in front of his place." This was done, but it was still ragged, disorderly, and lacked the smoothness of motion the boys themselves suddenly found they wanted. Finally, Louis Lower spoke up. "Dad, if we lined up so that the lead man came to his station first, and the next man filled the next station, and so on, it would seem better to me, even if we had to circle the room another time. This was done, and the regular order for officers entering the chapter room slowly took form. Marshall and Land watched each continuing development. It was satisfactory, but still lacked the precious quality of being just right. The impressiveness of pageantry was lacking. Land once more slowly walked to the center of the room. "We are making progress," he said, "but I have one further suggestion. It is this. An equilateral triangle has been used as a symbol in all ages. It is a symbol of significance and is part of some of the Masonic degrees. We could use its form for our entrance. I have been thinking that with the number of officers we have, we could make a living triangle. The Master Counselor could be the apex and stand just before the altar. The 7 preceptors could make up the last line, or base. The other officers in 3 diminishing lines could complete the triangle. Then, as reverence is to be part of our services, you might all kneel in unison as if in silent prayer. I would not suggest kneeling on both knees. That might be awkward, but perhaps we could kneel like George Washington at Valley Forge. Touch the floor with your left knee only. Place your right elbow on your right knee and rest your head in the cup of your right hand. And so, with infinite patience, each portion of the ritual was rehearsed, recast, and refined. Such small details as turning square corners, of timing as a candidate was conducted from station to station, of where the officers were to stand during the obligation, were rehearsed over and over. Personal appearance was stressed. It was suggested that suits should be worn to all meetings. At one time, rehearsals were delayed by Frank Land saying, "There are several who forgot to shine their shoes. Now in the kitchen on the floor beneath this room, next to the icebox, you will find shoe polish, brushes, and a shining cloth. We will wait while those of you who need it to retire to shine your shoes. I want each boy who enters this room to feel the importance of being a DeMolay, and your dress will give meaning to the words you speak." Perfection came to the phrases of floor work, and perfection came to the speaking and dramatic portions of the ritual. Some received their first lessons in public speaking during these rehearsal sessions from outstanding teachers and ritualists. Over and over, Frank Marshall would quote the lines of Shakespeare. "Speak clearly, if you speak at all. Weigh each word with care, ere you let it fall." To give authentic detail to the DeMolay degree, histories were read and pictures of costumes of the 14th century were studied. Experiments were made to give horror and realism to the dread punishment of death by fire. In the mind of Frank Land, everything in drama, ritual, or life should always be the best. He said at one time as he shook his finger at the group, "I want each of you to be a success. Be the best in whatever you do. I don't want you to become ditch diggers, but if you must, then dig the best and straightest ditches you possibly can." There was no tournament of champions, but these young men became champions as they worked together with growing pride in the anticipation of the first demonstration of their ritual of their order. One interesting question was raised during one of the rehearsals by the chaplain. "Dad, I am having trouble with my part," he said. "Not with the words or the delivery, but I have been taught that no prayer is complete without adding in Jesus' name. Our prayers do not have that. How come?" "Richard, the addition of the phrase, in Jesus' name, I know is important to you. If we used it in our prayers, however, our order would have meaning for only Christian boys like yourself. It would not have meaning for the boys who come from Jewish families or possibly other religious faiths. It might even be offensive to them and keep them from enjoying our fellowship. You see, religion in DeMolay should be universal and acceptable to all. I can explain best what I mean by this story. In the year 70 AD, the city of Jerusalem was completely destroyed by the legions of Rome under the commander Titus, her famous general. Before the walls of the temple were reduced to rubble, Titus entered the most sacred of the rooms, the Holy of Holies, called the Sanctum Sanctorum. This room and its contents were unknown even to the followers of Judaism. for here no one could enter except the high priest, and then only on special days of ceremony. This warrior had seen many places of worship, and many objects before which dedicated men had bowed their heads. Titus must have trembled as he stood before the curtain of this room and slowly drew it aside. He expected to see some object so sacred as to inspire a nation of such a religious faith as to defy Rome. Then, as he entered, he looked around and behold nothing. There was only the quietness of the unseen presence of God, who is a spirit and must be worshipped in spirit and in truth. The old general left with a feeling of awe. Surrounded by the horror and devastation of war, he was overcome by the intangible, the quiet, the stillness of God. This was the spirit of a great faith that occupied the holiest of places. The prayers of DeMolay should be like that. They should carry such a quiet, universal spirit of God as to be true to those who believe, as you do, in the salvation of Christ, as to those who follow the teachings of the ancient patriarchs and prophets. One by one, the questions were answered. Piece by piece, the elements of the ritual were completed so as to fit together to become a complete entity. Finally, all was in readiness for the first class of candidates on Saturday, September 27th, 1919. It was a large class, for as word spread of this new organization, the young men of the city rushed to place their names among those to be received in this first group of DeMolay. The initiatory degree began at 8:45 in the morning, with the candidates divided into groups of 16 or more to receive the degree and the obligation. Such groups were received all through the day with only a slight pause for lunch. A banquet was served in the evening, and then at 8 o'clock, the first presentation of the DeMolay degree was given with all of its drama, dedication, and sincerity. Master Masons by the score rose in standing ovation and crowded Dadland to extend congratulations and pledge support and help for what they called the greatest thing that has happened in their time. Slowly, they all left, and an exuberant but tired group of advisors talked over the events of a long day. Land turned to Marshall, saying, "You have written the perfect ritual for the perfect fraternity." Marshall replied, "Your dream is now truth. It will carry as an inspiration for young men through all of time."